Hey friends, I have Stephen Lawrence with me here today, and y'all, I have so enjoyed getting to know him. We've only had 2 conversations prior to this, but he has just encouraged me so much, and I cannot wait to introduce you guys
Good.
to him. He's with Daily Walk Fellowship, and I know you guys are going to get so much value out of today's conversation. So, Stephen, I'll let you take it from here. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey from kind of where you started to where you are now in this entrepreneurial journey, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. No, I'd love to. And I'm excited to be on, Whitney. Well, 30,000 foot view. I'm married. We've got 4 kids under 10. So it's a busy household in the Fort Worth, Texas area. And my journey to entrepreneurship is very much still unfolding as we speak. And it's been a been a very long journey for sure. Just to kind of hit it in a nutshell. I spent most of my 20s working in nonprofits and doing development work and working for an air conditioning company and just kind of bouncing around, honestly. Like I didn't have like a clear calling, a clear purpose, but I loved people. And I loved like sitting with people, talking to people. I'd looked at becoming a counselor at one point. And so in my late 20s, I started working at Chick-fil-A and got the opportunity to like receive professional coaching. And so I grew a lot from that, learned a lot from it, and got the opportunity to then pour back into like our leadership team, and just things were starting to click. And I was like, okay, God, like this is who you've called me to be, like to hold space and to, meet people as a coach and help them overcome like whatever challenges that they're facing. Right. And I say that too, because part of the journey has been giving up that identity later. So I'll come back to that. But I went and I got training and I worked for a company and I did the coach thing and I loved it. Like God confirmed, like, this is, who I've created you to be, at least in that soft skill way, right? Of just holding space for people. And so that was great. And then I left the coaching company and tried to start my own coaching company. Thought the timing was right and did not get it off the ground at all. And that's a whole nother story. But so I looked at doing, sales and had a sales role that opened up. And so I had the coaching company, had the LLC created, and I'm very risk averse. Like normally I would have had a year's savings and like all this stuff lined up before trying to do that. But I just felt like it was God's timing. And I still feel that way, which is, I guess, an interesting part of the journey, even though it didn't materialize at that time. So learned a lot, grew a lot, learned a lot of what I didn't know about, just building a business and sales especially. And so then I took a sales role and kind of kicking and screaming, but felt peace that was the next thing for me, and was aware at the time, thankfully, that I was like, God, if you've got me here for a reason and a purpose, I don't know how long. But if I ever want to run my own company, then I have to understand at least like the sales process, right? And as a side note, since then, in all these conversations I've had with entrepreneurs, that is fear is and imposter syndrome is one of the things that comes up. And then the second thing is sales, right? Like nobody has enough leads. Nobody, I'm speaking broadly here, but like nobody understands the sales process or what the most important thing is, right? And so I went in it with those eyes and learned a lot, grew a lot. I'm not the best salesperson ever, right? Like, but I understand now at least the process and the mindset. Like I did cold calling. So door to door, sales and building relationships that way. So I did that for a year, and I guess about 6 months in or so, like I got my first coaching clients. And so I had paid clients now. And so I was like, okay, God, like you've provided this, you've opened the door. And so who do you want me to serve? And that was the question that I had, right? Since he had actually opened that door. And so I took a day and fasted, which I'd never really done in my Christian life. And that was the big question that I asked, right? Was like, God, who do you want me to serve? And the answer that I got was Christian entrepreneurs. And specifically from my limited experience in the groups that I've seen and the entrepreneur faith-driven groups, I hadn't found one yet that really met that need for deep community and authenticity of like, let's help each other like walk with Christ and be a good steward of what he's given us, right? Like they were usually more focused on the business acumen side or the leadership side and everything. And so I just felt pulled or tugged to help encourage these people and to see the ripple effect as, hundreds and then thousands and of Christian entrepreneurs, walk in community and walk in their calling and walk closer to God, right? And their businesses, and just to see like the impact of that. And so it was also just on a personal note, it was really the start of just learning to walk by faith and learning to really seek God for, the next step and what he wants for my life. So it's all great, but then I sat on it out of a lot of fear of, like what does it look like and how do we make this happen? Um and then I had a death in the family of a close family member. And so I processed through that and walked through that. So in May of this year, going back for me, just the journey this year has been a lot of seeking God for what's next. And then there's usually, not usually, there's always like a step, right? Like what's the obedience before he shows me like the next step after that. And so I felt a lot of conviction on just posting and sharing with people that like, hey, we're going to start this weekly community group. And this is, what it's going to look like, we think, and, turn into, but this is the heart and the vision for it. And so throughout the time, I've noticed, been more aware of just my need for, one, to I think control and not fail, but two, also just to, the perfectionist in me and like wanting to make sure like every I is dotted and T is crossed before I release things or put things out. And so it's been a big process that I'm still walking through of just, just shipping it and to take that next step of obedience and then trust that, we'll know the step after that, and the details will kind of work themselves out. And that's that piece, and the sales piece, like I wish I had known, 2 years ago, year and a half ago, when I first started. And that's what I would, encourage anyone listening to really dig into. But so I posted on LinkedIn. It was a Friday afternoon, almost evening, I think. So not a great time to post, but I'd been working on it all week to get this post perfect and share what it was going to look like, and really went real personal and just kind of sharing my own story, which has a lot of isolation in it and just a lot of lack of community and lack of authenticity and everything. And so shared that. And since then, like people have just kind of been coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, via LinkedIn. So we started our first group 8 or 9 weeks ago. And it's just been cool to see the gap that I feel like that it's filling for people, and the need, and just encouraged to hear so many of them share. The details are different, but like share the same heart for like why they wanted to join and what they're getting out of it and everything. Because at the end of the day, and I'll wrap up here, especially as solopreneurs, we all walk alone, like our spouses, even the church. Like a lot of people they can relate to our feelings, but they can't relate to like the specific challenges as entrepreneurs that we go through, and the metamorphosis, I think that's the right term, like the change that happens, and like we all start out in our business. And it's been my experience and what I've heard from other people who are further down the road than I am in this journey, is that that's normal. That's a part of the process, right? Like we're going to start out with kind of what our vision is and our ideal client and all that, but it's going to morph and it's going to change. And then we're going to doubt like if what we're doing is the right thing. And then there's all the fear and the imposter, and, with where I feel like God's leading me and calling me, like it's so much bigger than me. And so it's really been a growth process of faith. And I don't know that I didn't expect that, one, going into it. And two, I don't know that I could have grown as much if I was just working a 9 to 5 job, right? Because there's not as much dependence on there. But that's like a high level view.
That's great. I was actually this morning, I was reading in John 10. And so, it was funny. We talked yesterday and we were talking about like the sheep know his voice and they follow him. And
Yeah.
this morning reading that, like obviously that part's true too. But then in John 10:10, when it talks about the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I come so that you can have life in abundance. And I think it is exactly what you're saying. The process of entrepreneurship is this like stripping of self to realize the lies of the enemy, where he is trying to, I think I wrote in my like margin in my Bible, like he kills purpose, he
Yeah.
steals identity, and he destroys what God has set in motion if we're not careful, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this, we're having to be reformed in the process
Yeah.
of learning how to release all these things that are trying to steal our purpose. But the enemy will keep us bound if we let him in,
Yep.
trying to keep us in the imposter syndrome, the fear. And I'm
Yeah.
so guilty of that. I mean, we've had those conversations.
Yeah.
I'll be real honest on here. We've talked about this, but literally last week had a complete meltdown for an entire day because what I thought was what my calling was just kind of imploded. And it was
Yep.
like, you have the choice. It's okay to have a pity party for a short period of time, right?
Yep.
Just don't camp there. Like somebody said that to me one time. They were like, you can throw a pity party, just don't camp there. Like after a day, it's time to pack up and move on, right?
Right.
But, it's okay to have the emotions, but recognizing like you can't let him steal your purpose. God comes to give satisfaction and abundance in the purpose he's given us. And so I love everything you're saying about that journey and really, especially not doing it in isolation, right?
Mhm.
Because when you're having a meltdown and you're like, God, I thought you said, and then this isn't going according to plan, if we're not able to step into it, like I talked to some friends and they're like, Whitney, I can commend you for your courage to keep pressing on because I think I would have given up by now.
Mm.
But I can't help you steward that because I know nothing about what God's asking you to do in this. I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't think that way. I don't understand it. And
Hmm.
so finding that community of people who understand and can share that value with you and encourage you in your own ways. You talked about that, and I want you to talk about it a little bit more if you're comfortable of, any given week in these communities, one of us is spiraling, right? And so that's the beauty of not doing it in isolation. You've talked about the value of this community and doing life together and building it apart from just business acumen or whatever, but really getting into like this sense of community and camaraderie. Why is
Mhm.
that so important for us? And what things should we be looking for in building that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it boils down to me, like, I think one of the biggest lies of the enemy that he would have us to believe, not just as entrepreneurs, but as believers, is that we're alone and that we're alone, but that also we're alone in our struggle, right? We're alone in what we're feeling. And if he can keep you there, then it's really hard to get the help that you need, right? And the support and the encouragement. And so part of my own journey this year, so I joined a mastermind group and we meet weekly. And what I didn't expect to get out of it, but I think what has almost become like the biggest encouragement outside of just the community piece and having a team, and having people that you can turn to and get the practical help of like, what do y'all think of this idea? Or I'm, testing this or whatever. But also like, hey, I just had a breakdown last week, or I don't know that this is still what I need to do. And I feel a lot of fear and like, all that. In that mastermind group, our main format, and this is the same main format currently we're using in the group that we're running, is very open-ended and hot seat time, to use that term. And so basically like members get an opportunity to come in and just share like whatever challenges they're facing or something they want to process or get the group's opinion on or whatever. And so that I found that even when I wasn't sharing, all spring, just hearing the journey of other entrepreneurs, like it opened my eyes to the fact that we're all walking through the same thing, right? Like at a foundational level, especially when it comes to like fear and imposter syndrome and the pressure that we feel and trusting God for our finances in a way that we've never had to, and stewarding what he's given us and all of that. It's just it's hard to explain unless you've sat in it, but it's just so encouraging to know that like I'm not the only one, and I'm normal for feeling this and walking through this, because we so often I was talking to a guy this morning, like we put a mask on, and I think the church is the worst at this big picture, right? And pretend that everything's fine. And so then there's the whole social media and everybody putting, the 3% of the best part of their life on. And so like we start to actually believe that we're the only one that's actually facing this stuff, that we're the only one that's actually walking through this. And so we don't open up, we don't share, we don't get help. Um, I think that's the biggest thing for me with just kind of the need for the community.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for me, part of where community comes in handy too is where the enemy hits me the most is like there's AI is so intelligent. Now everybody's a subject matter expert. There's no
Mhm,
room for you. Like, what are you trying to do? And it's like
mhm.
that it feels like I'm squeezed out, like my voice
Yeah,
is insignificant. But when
yeah,
you're around people who hear you and get excited with you, and
yep,
it restores that calling and that purpose of like, no, this is actually a God given vision, and the enemy wants to silence me. And if I compare the 3%, then it's going to.
yep,
But if I can be surrounded by community and people who see the calling in front of me and are championing me and encouraging me when I fall flat, it's encouraging there. And to
yep,
your point earlier, so when I was talking about my friends who are not entrepreneurs, and I was like, I'm spiraling, I don't know what to do with all of this.
mm,
And they were like, I just walked down the hallway and talked to my coworker. And I'm like, that's so convenient. Like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't have that when you're a solopreneur. And so it really is that value of community is just incredible. But there was
yeah,
something else that you said earlier about you kind of alluded to the identity piece, right? And
mhm,
so you mentioned spending the day fasting and praying and seeking the who would you have me serve?
mhm.
Talk to me a little bit more about like what was that process, the revelation? How did God begin to maybe unfold some of your identity within that?
Sure. So that first day specifically, as I mentioned, I had never really fasted, maybe once or maybe twice, maybe for a meal in my Christian walk. And so I took a day and just, really the big question was, who do you want me to serve? And then one of the specific prayers that I'd prayed, I'm a big writer and journaler and everything. And so I was like, God, anoint or inspire my writing today. And so he gave the clarity on and then he met me like in such a real way, Whitney. Like it's not almost, it is like in that moment, and this has been a big part of my journey too, like I'll pray that and then not actually believe that he'll come through or speak or. And so he did, and so he gave the clarity on the who, the Christian entrepreneur, um, which up to that point hadn't really been industry or subset of people that had been on my mind. And then he gave like 7 pages of notes around kind of like a content overview and module and everything for the year, which was just really cool to sit back and experience. The identity has shifted and kind of grown or refined. So going back to that moment, and then it shifted kind of dug into my why a little bit more and growing up, like I mentioned, the isolation and like nobody was there for me. And like I love meeting clients who don't have anybody else to talk to or talk to about whatever, we are talking about. And just have a heart for walking through tough things and crisis and stuff with people. And so I was like, cool, like that's thank you God for more clarity. And so like I looked at more crisis coaching and but still coaching through that. And I still have a heart for that, but what happened a month and a half ago or so is I was continuing again, it's been a refinement process and more clarity kind of comes a little slower sometimes than I wish. But the big picture vision for this for-profit ministry is the community groups, to go global and to have the opportunity for any Christian entrepreneur to be a part, and then to have a crisis support ministry where we take those same people and walk through, whatever's going on, are able to sponsor them through coaching and counseling and therapy. And then the third phase is to be able to build like retreat centers, right? That's the vision right now, and that's huge. Like it's bigger than me, and that's been abundantly clear. And so anyway, I share that to say that the day that all I felt like God kind of tied a bow on that. I was processing and praying through that and realized that like being a coach wasn't part of my identity anymore. And I realized also like it was hard to give up. Um, and I had to grieve it a little bit and feel some sadness over like, hey, I'm not pushing this one-on-one coaching anymore. And I still have some um, like clients, I'm still open to that. But as far as pushing that out and like, that being a part of my identity, that's not something that I have anymore. And so maybe God will bring it back. Definitely the skill set and the heart behind that, I still use in the groups and in one-off conversations and things like that, which I love. And maybe it's something that I just had to lay down for a time. But it was a big shift for me in realizing that to to fulfill this vision and to move that forward, like I'm not a one-on-one coach anymore, in that capacity. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard transition. I think one of the hardest things about entrepreneurship is having a vision and realizing it's so much bigger than yourself and trying
Mm,
not to get paralyzed in the perfectionism of trying to make it happen, but just take the daily act of, like faith is an action, right? Like
yep,
the daily action of obedience of saying, okay, God, I'm just going to take the next step in front of me. But
yep.
it gets really overwhelming. And like going back to reading in John, apparently really need to talk about John today, in John 6, when it talks about the feeding of the 5,000. And it's like, I think I wrote there, like, God will turn my not enough into more than sufficient. Right?
Mm,
And so it's like, all I have to do is bring my not enough. Here's my 2 fish and 5 loaves.
yep,
And then watch him not only feed the masses, but have leftovers
yeah,
that he is bringing back. It's like there's just so much abundance. And I think we can get really paralyzed in dreaming and seeing all the steps to get there and feel like I can't do this. And it's like, you
mhm,
don't have to.
yep,
It's a God-sized dream for a reason. You can't achieve it on your own. We have
yep,
to surrender that and then just take the daily action of seeking him and waiting for that next step to come and the
yep.
obedience of that rhythm.
Yep.
But
No,
it's
you're
easier said than
absolutely
done.
right. And that's been the process this year.
Yeah.
In fact, um I could read it real quick actually. In that same, I don't know if it was the same day or just like a week or two, like around that initial time. Um he gave me like a, what I call like my calling. It's more general and broad. But it's been really helpful in just keeping me centered in some of the things that you're sharing. I can read it real quick
Sure.
if that's cool. Okay, cool. So it says, "What I've called you to is hard and can only be done through me. I will get the glory. It's never about you, Stephen." Which stops me every single time because every time I read that, I feel this pause, this
Yes.
pride in me of like, you know, look at me and look at what I'm doing. And, even though like it's been all God, it's easy to do. And I think that's why he knew that I needed the reminder. Your job is to simply obey as I speak to you and watch me work through you. You do not need to have it all planned out, nor can you. Simply trust me for the next step. And once I tell you what to do, obey. Do not turn back. Continue to do my will and trust me. Do not doubt my power through you. I try to read that every morning, because it just really centers me and reminds me of like bigger picture, that it's not about me and that it's about taking those small steps of obedience and then just seeing what God reveals through that.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that you have it posted too. I need to go back and repost some of the things like in places where I see them, right? Like
Sure.
I wrote this really cool like breakup letter to fear months ago and I
Oh,
felt
cool.
so empowered and like I am overcoming fear. And then you know what? It's in a journal. I don't even know which journal at this point because I journal a lot. And so I'm like,
Yep.
I need to go back and find that
Yep.
and post it because your conviction right there of like, I look at this every day and
Yeah.
it gives me pause when I stop and think about like my greatest stumbling block is myself. If
Yep.
I would just get out of the way of what he's trying to accomplish,
Yep.
we could do so much more. But,
Yeah.
my performance, my pride, all of that trips me up all the
Yep.
time.
Yep. All the time. All the time. There's a great book called Humility by Andrew Murray that I'm reading right now. And he makes that case in such a way that I've never heard growing up in the church, that humility is, it's not just another virtue, like kindness or love or whatever, but like it is the virtue, right? And like anytime that we are not walking with God or walking in sin or not walking in our calling, like it can be traced down to some kind of pride. And, just how Jesus, like Satan exemplified pride, right? But
Yeah.
then Jesus and the more I read, like John especially, you just see this perfect submission of Christ, right? Like to God's will and to come into earth. And that's our example. Like that's who we're following. And so I think that is, for me at least, like will be one of the biggest ongoing challenges and things to work through, is to work on humility.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier like the steps that you've been taking and not I don't know exactly how you said it, but what came to mind is, the Footprints poem when it's like,
Yeah.
when life got too hard,
Yep.
there's only one set of footsteps, you picked me up. Have you seen the meme that was really popular like years ago that there was like a squiggly line, like this long squiggly line, and he was
Or
like, "What's that?"
drug 'em.
Yes, it's like where I dragged you kicking and screaming.
Right.
Like,
Right.
there are a lot of squiggly lines in my story
Mm.
where my stubbornness has not wanted to be harnessed.
Yep.
And so it comes down to a pride issue,
Yeah.
it's the pride of being unyielding, of not
Yeah.
wanting to give up my will for his.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
man,
Mm.
so good. Well, I know we've talked about God-sized dreams, we've talked about identity a little bit, but I know you've got just so many other takeaways about identity. Would you be willing to give a little just kind of snippet of what you've been learning about identity? I know you've been reading a book and then, just the encouragement of, I think, to your point earlier of, I think part of what we all struggle with as entrepreneurs is essentially finding our identity. Like
Mm.
it's this process of getting ourselves out of the way to be
Yep.
used by God for a greater purpose. And that's not respective only to entrepreneurship, right? Like there are people in ministry and other places that are going through the same process of like stripping of
Sure.
self to be used by him. But in that process, there's so much identity work that is part of that. So I would love to just maybe talk a little bit more about some of the things that you're learning about identity.
Sure. Sure. No, I'd be happy to. So you're right. I'm reading a book called Living Fearless by Jamie Winship, and he highly recommend you check him out, or your listeners check him out. But he spent years in the police department, and then he spent, I think, close to 30 years overseas in like Muslim countries. And their whole ministry was around identity. Think I think they're back in the States now. They run a group called Identity Exchange now, I believe. But he's gone into these countries and helped them find their identity and help them listen to God. And because of that, like it's just incredible to hear the stories of how God's worked through that. And so it's opening my eyes currently to I'm still one or two chapters into the book, to what my identity is in Christ, and even to the truth. Like I was reading yesterday, and he was making the analogy when it comes to like addictions and behaviors and things like that that we have, that a lot of us have this like pile of trash inside of us, which is the false beliefs system that we have, and we're constantly trying to shoo the rats away, which are the behaviors, the coping mechanisms, etc. And he's like, what we need to do is ask God to take the false beliefs away, right? And like to, be in his word and be reminded of the truth of who we are and who he is, so that the rats disappear for good, right? Because it's treating a symptom, not the root issue. But anyway, on the identity piece, so there's been more clarity for me on like who he's calling me to serve and kind of how and everything. But Jamie makes the case that we all have our identity in Christ as a son or a daughter, right? As like part of the family and as redeemed, and like all of that I think most of us are clear on. Whether we believe it or not, it's a separate issue, but we at least know what it says, right? Like that's for me at least. But he's like, who does God say you are? Like if he calls your name at night while you're sleeping, like what is the name that he uses? And he believes that everybody is uniquely and fearfully, wonderfully made. That we're knit together in our mother's womb before we're even born, that God has a specific gifting and wiring and purpose for us. And so what he revealed to me is that he calls me his chain breaker. And so like the more that I think about and lean into that, like it's like a culmination of my entire life and my own story, battling addiction, and just my heart for people and people who are bound by whatever chain is holding them back. And he makes the case, like so often, especially in the Western culture, like we focus on the doing, like what's our vocation, what's our calling, what's our and we don't really dig into, at least I know I didn't, like our identity and who we are, right? And he's like, we get it wrong. We put the cart in front of the horse, because if we are clear in our identity and who we are, then the calling and the vocation flows out of that, right? Almost, not almost, like naturally, right? And so, and you know, ministry at church or this entrepreneur group or whatever random conversations that I have, that's who I am, right? Like I'm a chain breaker. And so that comes up in whatever vocation and conversation and things that I'm a part of. So it's been cool to ask me in 6 months and I'll probably have more clarity around that, maybe more thoughts, but it's been cool just to experience that and lean into it and just to realize that to go back to the truth, like when we're in fear or when we're, he talks about like fear is an identity. It's a false identity. But, if we live in that false identity of fear or guilt or shame, then that affects everything that we do, right? That's the filter that we use. That's our perspective. And so I think the more that we can ask God who he says that we are and like read his word, especially around the identity pieces and who he says that we are, the more that that becomes firm and established, then the more it gets clear on what he's called us to do.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but the the untethering of my identity, as I've said,
Mhm.
from performance, because I think for so long that has been where I have found worth or purpose is in how
Yeah.
I perform and how I climb the ladder and what I deliver. And it's like, no, that's what you're doing. That's sometimes purposeful, but a lot of times it's distracting you from
Mhm.
what I'm calling you to. And so I love the reset of like, who do you say I am? And
Mm.
then being able to come back to that. And so it's not my performance that gives me worth. It's the fact that I am, in your case, like a chain breaker. This is what I'm called to. This is who I
Right.
am. And so I don't have to worry about performance because I'm just breaking chains. It's
Mhm.
like that whole identity reset and reframe is just incredible. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah. And it gives a lot of in confidence, not in yourself, but like in this is who God created me to be. And if I can share very briefly, like that, I think that's a big overarching desire and heart to help Christian entrepreneurs is because there's so much potential.
Yeah.
There's so much potential, right? Like God has called and equipped them and wants to do so much through their business and through just the impact and the stewardship that that has. But I think there's a lot of opportunity, speaking for myself, like of us instead, like we spin our wheels in fear, or we're not real clear in our calling, or we're not just walking in encouragement and community with each other. And so the enemy would, lo- the enemy would love nothing more. Than for us to stay like that, right? And not to realize our full potential through Christ. And so I think that's the exciting, encouraging thing to me is, if I can play a part in encouraging people to do more fully what God has called them to do than just the impact that that can have.
Yeah. I quote it all the time. I think it's First Corinthians 12:12. It talks about how we're all part of the body, but
Mm,
each one has its role to play. And if we're not showing up, the body's not working in its entirety, right? And so, yeah, each one of us that's held captive in fear, we're not showing up in the identity God's given us, that purpose that He's created in advance for us to do, Ephesians
right.
2:10. It's like we all have this purpose, and collectively we win when each person shows up emboldened, right?
Mhm.
Like that's my word is like emboldening people to rise up to that because then we build the body in unity, we build the purpose of the church and we reach more people collectively.
Yep.
But it requires
Yep.
each one of us playing our part. So I love that that's your heartbeat. I love that God's calling you to step into that and can't wait to see how he continues to use it.
Yeah. Me too. Me too.
So I have one more question
Sure.
for you. And we've already talked a lot about fear, but maybe what is something that you feel like has caused you to trip up in the entrepreneurial journey, or it can be a fear. We've just already camped out so much on fear, like something, or maybe it's even a different question. Maybe it's what's some advice you would give to somebody who has been struggling with fear as they move forward in their journey?
Hmm. Well, first, like I deal with fear basically every day, right? Like if actually my advice would be keep your eyes on Jesus.
Hmm.
Um, and I love trying to come back to what is the simplest, most foundational truth or principle or need, in whatever it is. And that's really what it comes down to. As soon as my eyes come off Jesus, then the fear comes in, right? Everything is, especially in this entrepreneurial journey, like I tell my wife this a lot, like a lot of this journey has been clinging on to the promises of God to the truth of his word. And and what I mean by that is like verses like, cast all your burdens upon God and he'll sustain you, right? Like those kinds of or like, you're going to walk through fire, you're going to walk through the water, but don't fear because I'm going to be with you, right? He doesn't say that we're not going to walk through it. In fact, like he says, we're going to walk through, stuff, but he says, don't fear because I'm with you. And I've seen that and I've felt that and I've had peace that does pass all understanding, right? But as soon as I take my eyes off Jesus, then it all falls apart. And so I think that's what I would encourage them with, that and just this mindset shift, if I can share this real quickly,
Yeah.
of realizing most of my life, like I know the scripture, I've read the Bible, I can explain doctrine to you, right? But I haven't actually believed
Mhm.
when the rubber meets the road, right? Or I've waited until like I feel like believing before I believe. And so a big part of this journey and refinement and growth for me is like the verse, like yesterday, for example, like I kept coming back to cast all your
Go ahead.
burdens upon God and he'll sustain you. Um, and just chose to believe it, right? Like I've realized that for so long I have just like I've prayed an empty prayer and then not believed it. And the feeling comes afterwards, right? Like the feeling comes after we choose to believe and after God meets us in that. And he always does. He always sustains us unless we take our eyes off him. And then he's gracious to forgive us and welcome us back. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Oh, I love that. It's so good. I feel like in line with that, I've been learning a lot about draw near. We
Mm,
draw near to him, he'll draw near to us. So
yeah,
it's the seeking, the being still before him, and then to receiving. So I can ask the big prayers, but then I'm a little independent. And so actually asking for it and then receiving it when God wants to give it. Not
sure,
being like, well, it's taken a little too long. I think I'm gonna go control the situation or
sure.
whatever, but like really sitting long enough to be like, okay, I trust that you're gonna answer it like you were saying. But then also, I'm gonna trust that when it comes, I need to then receive it with open hands, even if
Mm,
it looks different than I anticipate it to,
yep,
right?
yep,
So
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Well, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, connect with you, how would they best connect with you?
Sure. So I'm real active on LinkedIn, and then they could always email me and we can put that in the show notes maybe.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today
Of
and
course.
just your encouragement and identity, your honesty. There's just so many great things that I can't wait to recap and really just appreciate your friendship and all your wisdom too.
Likewise. Likewise. I appreciate it, Whitney.